The dust of the high desert settled on everything at Blackwood Air Base, a fine, gritty powder that worked its way into gears, lungs, and moods. It was a place of extremes: blistering sun and freezing nights, the piercing scream of afterburners, and the profound, heavy silence that followed. Into this crucible walked Elara Vance. She carried a single duffel bag, her movements economical, her face a mask of placid neutrality that the bored gate guard mistook for uncertainty. He looked at her transfer papers, then back at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. She was assigned to the maintenance hangars, another body to fill a slot, barely registering as a blip on the base's radar. The hangar chief, a grizzled master sergeant named O'Connell, gave her the same once-over. He saw a woman of average height, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot and eyes that seemed to absorb the light without reflecting it. Her file was thin, almost suspiciously so: a standard enlistment, a failed attempt at pilot training, and a sideways transfer into aircraft mechanics. A washout, he grunted, pointing to a locker. Stow your gear. Diaz will show you the ropes. Try not to break anything. The mechanics, a tight-knit crew of young men, fueled by energy drinks and bravado, barely acknowledged her arrival. She was a ghost in their periphery, assigned to tasks no one else wanted: sweeping the endless concrete floors, cleaning grease traps, and sorting bolts into their designated bins. She did it all without complaint, her silence a strange, dense presence in the loud, boisterous hangar. They took her quietness for timidity, her efficiency for a lack of ambition. She was just Vance, the washout. Colonel Marcus Thorne was a man carved from the same unforgiving landscape as the base he commanded. He moved with a starched rigidity, his uniform immaculate, his gaze a tool for dissecting failures. He believed in order, in hierarchy, and in the clear, unambiguous lines of authority. His current obsession, and the source of his perpetual scowl, was the XJ-7 Wraith project. It was a revolutionary new engine, a marvel of composite alloys and adaptive turbine geometry, designed for a next-generation stealth fighter. It promised unparalleled performance, but on the ground, in the hands of his mechanics, it was a temperamental beast. It was complex, esoteric, and it refused to run smoothly for more than a few hours. The project was falling behind schedule, and the pressure from the Pentagon was immense. During a walkthrough of the main hangar, his eyes landed on Elara. She was on her knees, meticulously cleaning a coolant line with a small, precise brush. Thorne stopped, his shadow falling over her. "Who is this, Sergeant?" he asked O'Connell, not bothering to lower his voice. O'Connell stepped forward. "Airman Vance, sir." Recent transfer. Thorne took the data slate from his aide and scanned her file, his lip curling in distaste. "Pilot program reject." "Is this what they're sending me now, O'Connell?" "People who couldn't cut it in the cockpit, so we let them play with multi-million-dollar engines." Elara didn't flinch. She simply finished her task, wiped her hands on a rag, and stood, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on a point just past the colonel's shoulder. Her silence seemed to provoke him more than any retort could. "Look at me when I'm addressing you, Airman," he snapped. She met his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, no defiance. There was nothing but a deep, unnerving calm. "Do you even know which inner wrench to hold?" he sneered. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice even and low. It was the first time most of the hangar had heard her speak more than a single word. Thorne stared at her for a long moment, waiting for more, for some crack in her composure. Finding none, he turned away in disgust. "Keep her away from the Wraith engine. I don't need any more variables." He strode off, leaving a wake of tense silence. The other mechanics exhaled, some snickering quietly. Diaz, a young, wiry mechanic who thought himself a wit, leaned over. "Don't mind the colonel. His bark is worse than his bite." Elara just nodded, her attention already returning to the machinery around her, the colonel's dismissal sliding off her as easily as oil from steel. She was relegated to the periphery, a silent observer in the theater of frustration that was the XJ-7 Wraith. While the other mechanics wrestled with diagnostic scanners and argued over schematics, Ilara performed her menial duties with a monk-like focus. But she was always watching. Her eyes would trace the intricate lattice of hydraulic lines, follow the path of the fuel injectors, and linger on the delicate, fan-like blades of the primary turbine. She saw the mechanics' mistakes, their assumptions. They were treating the Wraith like any other engine, applying standard diagnostics to a machine that was anything but. They were trying to force it into submission. They weren't listening to it. The Wraith was more than metal and wire. It was a system, a complex organism with its own rhythms and eccentricities. One afternoon, while cleaning a discarded tool bench, she rolled up the sleeves of her coveralls. Just above her wrist, a sliver of a tattoo was visible. It was a single, stylized raven, its wings swept back as if in a dive, its form rendered in stark black ink. Diaz noticed it. "Nice ink, Vance. What's the bird?" She pulled her sleeve down without looking at him. "Just a drawing," she said. But for a fleeting moment, as she glanced at the hulking, silent form of the Wraith engine, her expression softened. She moved closer to the machine, drawn by an invisible current. The other mechanics were at lunch, the hangar blessedly quiet. She reached out and laid her palm flat against the cold, matte black casing of the engine. It was a gesture of communion, a silent greeting. She could feel the faint, latent energy within the metal, the stored potential. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to hear a whisper in a storm. She knew this machine. She knew the precise, tensile strength of its alloys, the resonant frequency of its compressor blades, the secret language of its diagnostic codes. She knew it not as a mechanic knows an engine, but as a creator knows her creation. The men saw a washout. The colonel saw a liability. The machine, in its cold silence, felt a familiar touch. The pressure reached its breaking point on a Tuesday. A critical ground test was scheduled, a full-power simulation demanded by the program directors in Washington. The air in the hangar was thick with anxiety. O'Connell barked orders, his usual gruffness sharpened to a razor's edge. Diaz and the others moved with a frantic, nervous energy, double-checking connections and running the same failed diagnostics over and over. Colonel Thorne stood in the observation booth overlooking the hangar floor, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. The test began. The Wraith engine spooled up, its initial low hum escalating into a powerful roar. For a moment, it sounded perfect. The numbers on the monitors climbed into the green. Then a shudder. A low, guttural cough echoed through the hangar, a discordant note in the symphony of power. A high-pitched whine began to emerge, piercing and unstable. On the main monitor, a cascade of red warning lights blinked to life. "Thrust is fluctuating," Diaz shouted over the intercom. "Turbine temperature is spiking. We got a harmonic imbalance." O'Connell's face went pale. "Shut it down. Shut it down now." But the engine refused to respond. The shutdown sequence failed. The whine intensified, the entire test rig vibrating violently. It was the death rattle of a machine tearing itself apart. Panic began to ripple through the crew. A catastrophic failure would not only destroy the prototype, it could take half the hangar with it. Thorne's voice, tight with fury and fear, crackled over the speakers. "Get it under control, O'Connell, or I'll dash." His voice was drowned out by a loud bang from the engine's core. The lights flickered. The moment of crisis had arrived. Amid the rising tide of panic, a figure moved with calm, deliberate purpose. Ilara Vance. She had been standing by the far wall, observing. Now, she walked toward the flailing machine. "Vance, get back!" O'Connell yelled, waving a frantic arm. She ignored him. Her eyes were locked on the engine, her focus absolute. She didn't look at the screaming monitors or the flashing lights. She looked at the machine itself. She strode to a forgotten toolbox in the corner, one filled with older, specialized instruments the younger mechanics deemed obsolete. Her hand went straight to a specific tool, a custom-forged resonance wrench with a weighted, oddly shaped head. Diaz had once called it a dinosaur bone. She moved to the side of the violently shaking test rig, stepping inside the safety perimeter everyone else was scrambling to exit. She placed one hand on the engine's casing, closing her eyes for a second, feeling the chaotic vibrations run up her arm. Then she went to work. There was no hesitation. Her movements were a fluid dance of precision and economy. She didn't consult a schematic. She didn't need to. She used the resonance wrench to make 3 infinitesimal adjustments to a series of harmonic dampeners buried deep within the engine's housing, turning them by feel, not by sight. Then, picking up a calibrated driver, she twisted a sequence of microvalves on the primary fuel manifold, her actions too quick and confident to be guesswork. It was a surgical intervention, performed in the heart of a maelstrom. The effect was immediate. The piercing whine faltered, dropping in pitch. The violent shudders subsided, smoothing out. The cacophony of alarms and bangs lessened, replaced by a steady, powerful hum. On the monitors, the red lights blinked out one by one, replaced by solid green. The Wraith engine was not just stable. It was running perfectly, its roar a clean, pure expression of power. A profound silence fell over the hangar, broken only by the engine's now-perfect thrum. Every eye was on Alara. She stood beside the machine, breathing evenly, the resonance wrench still in her hand. She had not spoken a word. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief. O'Connell stared, his mouth agape. Diaz looked from the perfectly running engine to the quiet woman standing beside it, his expression a cocktail of awe and confusion. In the observation booth, Colonel Thorne lowered his binoculars, his face an unreadable mask of shock. Finally, O'Connell found his voice, a raw whisper. How did you do that?" Alara turned, her face betraying no emotion, no hint of triumph. She looked at the chief, then at the engine. The tertiary fuel injectors were out of sync with the harmonic frequency of the turbine, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "It creates a feedback loop." She placed the resonance wrench back on the bench, as if it were a common screwdriver. It was out of alignment. The simplicity of her explanation only deepened the mystery. They had run dozens of tests, used the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the Air Force's inventory, and found nothing. She had diagnosed and fixed a catastrophic failure in under 30 seconds using an old tool and her bare hands. The dynamic in the hangar had fundamentally shifted. The dismissive glances were replaced with looks of cautious respect. The snickers and jokes at her expense evaporated. When she walked by, the other mechanics fell silent, watching her. They started leaving a space for her at the main workbench. Diaz, feeling a fool for his earlier condescension, approached her later that day. "Look, Vance'd about before. What you did back there, nobody's ever seen anything like it." He gestured toward the raven tattoo, now partially visible again. "What does that symbol mean, anyway?" Alara considered the question for a moment, her gaze distant. "It's for remembrance," she said, and offered nothing more. The whispers started then. Quiet theories passed between grease-stained hands. She wasn't a washout. No washout could do what she did. She had to be from a Black Ops unit, or maybe from the manufacturer's Special Projects Division, sent undercover. The name on her file, Alara Vance, began to feel like a flimsy cover for a much deeper, more complex identity. A squall line appeared on the horizon that evening, a bruised purple stain against the setting sun. By nightfall, the base was being battered by torrential rain and high winds. A priority alert came down from command. A weather satellite crucial for tracking the storm's unpredictable path had gone dark, and a manned reconnaissance flight was needed to get real-time atmospheric data. It was a high-risk mission, essential for civilian evacuation warnings along the coast. The only aircraft available with the sensory equipment needed for the job was the experimental fighter, the one powered by the XJ-7 Wraith. Thorne's command center was a hive of controlled tension. "Is the jet ready?" he demanded. O'Connell's voice crackled over the comms from the hangar. "Sir, the engine is stable, but we've never flown it in these conditions. The rapid temperature and pressure changes, it's a huge risk." Thorne paused. The mission was critical, but the thought of his billion-dollar prototype failing in mid-air was a nightmare. He made a decision born of desperation and a new, unsettling flicker of trust. "Put the washout on your team, O'Connell. I want our eyes on every diagnostic before that plane leaves the ground. The order was a quiet earthquake in the hangar. It wasn't a test anymore. It was a live, mission-critical assignment. Alara was brought to the primary console. She didn't look at the nervous faces around her. Her focus was entirely on the data streams flowing from the engine. She ran a series of deep-level diagnostics, using command codes that made O'Connell's eyebrows shoot up. They weren't in any manual he'd ever seen. For 10 minutes, she scanned the results, her expression unreadable. Then she stood up. "There's a microfracture in the second-stage compressor blade," she announced. "The primary sensors can't detect it, but it'll shear under the stress of high-altitude atmospheric turbulence." O'Connell and Diaz immediately ran a new ultrasonic scan of the area. "Nothing." "Vance, the scans are clean," O'Connell said, his voice strained. Alara walked over to the engine, popped open a service panel, and pointed to a specific spot on one of the blades, a marvel of sculpted metal. "There," she said. "It's less than a micron wide. You need to look for the shift in the alloy's refractive index, not a crack." Using a handheld laser micrometer, Diaz aimed it where she pointed. The display flickered, and then a number appeared that made his blood run cold. She was right. A catastrophic failure waiting to happen. There was no time to replace the blade. The mission window was closing. Without a word, Alara retrieved a small, specialized kit. It contained a portable induction welder and several thin metallic strips that looked like foil. In a display of impossible field engineering, she applied a polymer resin and then used the welder to bond a reinforcing strip over the hairline fracture, her hands moving with the steady grace of a surgeon. "It will hold for 12 hours, she stated. Thorne, watching on a remote feed, gave the green light. The jet took off into the storm. For the next 3 hours, the entire hangar held its breath, watching the telemetry. The engine performed flawlessly, its metrics holding rock steady through the worst of the turbulence. The mission was a success. The pilot's voice, full of awe, came over the comms upon landing. That engine, it purred like a kitten in a hurricane. Tell the ground crew they're miracle workers. O'Connell looked over at Alara, who was quietly cleaning her tools. He knew it wasn't the crew. It was her. Colonel Thorne could no longer ignore the glaring reality in his hangar. The woman his instincts had dismissed as incompetent was single-handedly saving his most critical project. The inconsistencies were too vast, her skills too profound to be accidental. That night, sitting alone in his office, he did something he rarely did. He pulled strings. He made a call to a contact at the Pentagon, a 2-star general in Air Force Research and Development, and requested that Alara Vance's file be unsealed. He used his own authority as collateral. The request was met with bureaucratic silence, then resistance. Her file was flagged with the highest level of classification. It took Thorne invoking a national security priority to finally get a heavily redacted digital copy sent to his secure terminal. He opened the file. Most of it was blacked out. Her service history, her training records, her previous assignments, all gone. But what remained was enough to stop his heart. Alara Vance was not a pilot washout. That was a cover story, an administrative fiction. A single, clear line of text stated her real position: Lead Propulsion Systems Architect and Chief Test Engineer, Skunk Works Division. She was the doctor. She was one of the primary designers of the XJ-7 Wraith engine. Attached to the file was a short, encrypted message from the 4-star general in charge of the entire next-generation fighter program. It read, "Thorne, you have Nix in your hangar. She designed the bird. She knows its soul. The purpose of her deployment was to observe the engine's performance and maintenance protocols in a real-world, blind environment to identify weaknesses our labs couldn't. Her assessment is critical. Trust her judgment." Implicitly, Thorne leaned back in his chair, the sterile light of the monitor illuminating his stunned face. Nix, a call sign from the shadowy world of black projects. The Greek goddess of the night. It fit her perfectly. The silent observer who saw everything in the dark. He thought back to his condescension, his dismissive words, his arrogance. He had been sneering at the very person who held the key to his success, a quiet genius hiding in plain sight. He had mistaken brilliance for timidity and expertise for insignificance. The next morning, the energy in the hangar was different. The story, or at least the essence of it, had trickled down. No one knew all the details, but they knew she was not who she seemed. When Alara walked in, the usual morning clatter of tools and coarse jokes subsided. The mechanics, including O'Connell and Diaz, watched her with a new kind of reverence. They didn't just see Vance the mechanic anymore. They saw a puzzle they were only just beginning to comprehend. Colonel Thorne entered the hangar, his boots echoing on the concrete. He walked directly toward her, his path unwavering. The entire crew stopped what they were doing to watch. Alara was running a diagnostic on the Wraith, her back to him. She didn't turn until he was standing a few feet away. She straightened up, her expression as neutral as ever. Thorne looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not a subordinate, but a peer. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He didn't offer a clumsy apology. His pride wouldn't allow it, and he knew a woman like her wouldn't need it. Instead, he extended his hand. "Dr. Vance," he said. The use of the title was a formal concession, a public acknowledgement of his error and her true standing. It echoed in the silent hangar, a cannon shot of recognition. "Your insights have been invaluable." "Thank you." Alara looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then at his face. She gave a single, brief nod and took his hand. Her grip was firm, her own silent acknowledgement. As Thorne turned and walked away, a movement caught his eye. It was Diaz, the young mechanic, standing by the fuselage, instinctively snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, his eyes locked forward in a crisp salute. It wasn't an order. It was a spontaneous gesture of pure respect. One by one, the other mechanics followed his lead. They straightened their postures, standing at attention as she turned back to her work. She had not asked for their deference, but she had earned it. Alara, now openly addressed as Dr. Vance, was no longer on the periphery. She was the center. She didn't lead with speeches or commands, but with quiet action. She organized the workflow for the Wraith's maintenance with an efficiency that shamed the old system, drawing up new protocols on a simple data slate. She began teaching the other mechanics, not through lectures, but by working alongside them. She would point to a specific component, explain its function in simple, direct terms, and show them the proper way to service it. The hangar became a classroom, the roar of engines its lecture hall. O'Connell and Diaz became her most devoted students, absorbing every piece of information, their earlier arrogance replaced by a hungry curiosity. The base was no longer a place of dismissal for her, but one of quiet authority. She still wore the same simple coveralls, her hair still pulled back in the same tight knot. Nothing about her external appearance had changed, but everyone saw her differently now. They saw the mind behind the quiet eyes, the strength in the silent posture. Her work complete, her mission to assess the engine's field performance concluded, new orders came. She was to be extracted and returned to the Skunk Works labs. On her final day, she stood before the XJ-7 Wraith one last time. It was humming on the test rig, a low, steady thrum of perfect health. It was a sound of harmony, a machine understood and cared for by its creator. The mechanics stood in a silent semicircle, a respectful distance away. Colonel Thorne was there, his hands clasped behind his back. No one spoke. Alara placed her hand on the engine's casing, the metal warm beneath her palm. The stark, black raven tattoo on her wrist stood out against her skin. It was a symbol of remembrance, she had told Diaz. Perhaps she meant it was to remember the engine's secrets, or perhaps it was to remember a time when she was invisible, a ghost in a machine shop. She gave the engine a final, gentle pat and turned to leave. As she walked toward the hangar door, where a black, unmarked vehicle waited, the low, powerful hum of the Wraith engine was the only sound that followed her. It was a sound of respect, a mechanical salute from the beast she had tamed. The dust motes of the high desert still danced in the shafts of light, but in the silence she left behind, something had been permanently transformed. Strength had been revealed not in words, but in work, and respect had been earned not by rank, but by quiet, undeniable competence.